Perfect. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Siavash Ghorbani. I know it's a difficult name. I learned yesterday that there is a way to teach French people to remember this name. So the first part, Sia, is Farsi. It means black. And I learned that Vash means cow. So black cow. And I hope you will remember it now. Well, I'm CTO and co-founder of a company called Tictail. How many of you knew about Tictail before you came here? No one. Good. So Tictail is best described as the easiest way to start a beautiful online store. As of a few months ago, when you start an online store on the Tictail platform, you're also connected to the Tictail marketplace. So we launched in 2012 and have since experienced some really phenomenal growth in terms of stores on the platform. Most of the stores on Tictail are within fashion, design, and art. They're small to medium-sized businesses, 2 to 10 employees. But we also have really, really big businesses using Tictail as an online sales platform. We have customers like H&M, Lufthansa, or McDonald's. And I think the foundation that has enabled us to achieve this type of growth in usage is primarily related to the organizational growth that we had, the things that we've done with the company. And today I thought I'd run you through the story of how 4 people founding a company in Stockholm, Sweden. Up until the launch, we're about 7 people. To today, 62 people in 2 offices. We now have an office in New York as well, with about 15 employees. So we have marketing and business development in New York and product development in Stockholm. So before we get to the launch, I wanted to start even before that. So how Tictail even came to be. And this was in 2011. And we started to get this notion that e-commerce was stuck. Everything else, digital, had progressed so fast. And I think my favorite example of this is, even in 2011, you could sit on an airplane, mid-air, connected to the plane's Wi-Fi system, with your iPad, having a video conference with someone on the other side of the planet. But yet setting up an online store was something that was tricky. So we thought there is perhaps a problem here. So we went out and started to see if we could do some really basic market research. See if, are we crazy to believe that this should be this easy? Is there actually a need for something like this? So we started asking, well, actually we built a survey with a bunch of questions. And the first question was more of a courtesy question. It was, how would you describe what you do? And then we went out to people who were selling things in traditional retail and people who were doing the exact same thing but selling things online. When we went through all the answers, it came out that the first answer was the most important one, because everyone who sold something physically offline were always very accurate in describing their craft. I do designer jeans, I do designer glasses, I do art, posters, etc. But the same people selling things online, almost all of them said, I do e-commerce. And it's ridiculous if you think about it, because here's someone who spent 10,000 hours learning and mastering a craft, producing beautiful things, and yet the thing they describe as what they do is overcoming a technical barrier. And we thought that we should go in and change that. And at the core of it, I mean, I love e-commerce, but it wasn't e-commerce that was the core of it. And I was actually reading the family's goal out there, and our vision wasn't very different from that. We wanted to allow anyone, anywhere in the world, to become an entrepreneur. But by removing the technical barriers of starting an online business, we could have the biggest global impact. So we started out with the whole concept of making it extremely easy to start an online store. As I was going through this presentation yesterday, I realized that a lot of the things I say sound like there was a linear progression from an idea and a fantastic result. There has never been such a moment in the history of Tictail, and there will probably never be. We've never had a eureka moment where someone had an idea and that idea automatically ended up being the final product. Keep that in mind as we go through this presentation, that everything in here is the result of numerous ideas being combined, releasing to subset of users, learning, listening, getting feedback, and iterating on that process. Anything from product changes to processes to anything else. So back to the beginning, we set out to start this business. At this point, this is in early 2012, we really didn't have any processes of how to work. We took one of the walls in the office, it was about the length of this size, and painted it in a whiteboard paint, meaning that you could start painting on the wall. And then our process became adding things that we thought would be necessary for the product in the shape of a to-do list. And this is just a small, small fraction of that. And then we estimated how long we thought everything would take, and that eventually started to become somewhat of a floating deadline. Then, out of nowhere, we received a phone call. There was a lady on the other side. She was a representative for a conference called the Nordic E-commerce Summit. And the Nordic E-commerce Summit, well, I didn't know this either back then, so I don't judge you, is the biggest e-commerce conference in the Nordics. 2,000 people in the business are attending. And usually they never allow service providers up on stage. It's a conference for people to share experiences. But because we hadn't launched, and she had heard some rumors that we wanted to disrupt e-commerce, they asked if we would be interested in coming to talk at the conference. A huge opportunity. So we hung up. We said we'd get back to her. We went back to this white wall and counted all the hours, like, okay, the conference is in 9 weeks. We can probably do it. So we called back and said, we can do you one up. Not only can we talk at the conference, we could actually launch Tictail at the conference. They were really excited, and we decided that that's the way it's going to be. Well, we were really confident about our deadline, like ridiculously so. Well, not only did we announce it everywhere, we told every journalist we met that this is going to be a big deal. We changed the landing page to count down from weeks to days to hours, minutes down to seconds, to what we thought would be the time we were up on stage. We hadn't received an hour, we just knew the day. The cool thing of doing it that way was we could adjust it slightly the days before. But as I'm sure you imagine, things aren't always that smooth. And when we were 3 weeks away from the launch, we realized that there's no chance we'll be able to fit all the things on that white wall in the product that we're going to release. And this is especially concerning pre-launch, because the idea you have about your product, the idea you have about the product you want to release to your users is usually pretty grand. At the moment you start building things, you start thinking about the next thing that's going to be so important for your users. So you get delusional in the concept of what are the things that we should include. There's essentially, if you don't have a proper deadline, either set by you or an external one, you will probably just keep pushing. We were in some sense lucky that we had this external deadline that forced us to consider what we could chop off out of this release. It was, in one way, a very hard choice because we were set that all of these things should be there. On the other, it was a really simple choice. If we don't chop things off, we can't launch at this event. This event is really important. In particular, there was one feature that we had to chop off because it was a really big part of the product. It was what we call the to-do feed. So the way the to-do feed works in Tictail is we collect data about the store owner's behavior, things they've done with their store, and then we collect data about customers' behavior, and then we turn that data into insights, and we tell them, hey, you should do this and this in order to improve your store. It's anything from really basic things, like this person bought these 2 cups 2 weeks ago. Ask them what they liked about it, if they liked it. Or these products are not performing as well as the other ones, you should consider investigating AdWords. Here's a campaign creator. But we had to chop that off, and that was really weird because we didn't think people would understand or appreciate Tictail for what it was without it. But as I'm sure you guessed by now, we managed, we did the launch, and the launch on itself was a huge success without many of the things that we had in mind. And it turned out that all the things that were half complete, we turned into subsequent launches afterwards. And instead we got more traction because of it, because people would think that we were moving really, really fast with the product. So all the old users were super happy because they got new features, like the to-do feed. And we got pressed about the new features, which meant that more users came to the product. So at this point in time, we've now launched. We started to get some early traction, and we started to think about scaling the team. So right after the launch, we're about 7 people. And even from that point, we considered team to be our competitive advantage. A great team that would set us apart from all the other companies around us. And there are many things that determine how you build a great team. It could be how appealing your vision is, how appealing your culture is, how much you pay people. But no matter what, recruiting will always be a part of that. Recruiting will always be a key component of growing your team. And anyone who's done any form of recruiting knows that it's hard. Recruiting is always hard because you always want to get the best people you possibly can. And the secret is, so does everyone else. So the people you're approaching obviously have a lot of options. So you want to bring out the best of your company every time you're pitching to someone that you want to recruit. And many parts of that comes from not only you, but the other people in your company. Really early on, we made recruiting everyone's #1 priority. What I mean by that is that unless you were signing a term sheet of $10 million funding, or Tictail was burning, we were down, the service was unavailable, if somebody came in for an interview, that was more important than anything else you did. And in the earliest days, our recruiting process wasn't at all efficient. It was highly optimized for cultural fit, which probably was a good thing, but it doesn't really scale. So up until about 20 people, every single person in the company had to meet people we were recruiting. And everyone had to say thumbs up. And it started getting a little bit ridiculous because part of this process was we went out on a dinner with that person. And not only is it really, really hard to find really talented engineers, but finding someone who can entertain 20 people at a dinner at the same time, because everybody's asking that person questions, is really, really hard. So we started questioning whether we were starting to optimize for the wrong things. And we started to review our process. And after several iterations, we've now landed on something that goes along these lines, essentially. But culture is still a huge part in this. So we have essentially 4 steps. We have a screening step, task, a team meeting, and a decision. Both screening and team is entirely about culture. Only the second one is about skills. So the way it works is we meet a candidate for a screening process, like the screening interview. And the entire purpose of that meeting is to pitch the vision, the direction of the company, the culture of the company. And the thing I want to benchmark during that meeting is, does these 3 things align with that person's interest? Because if they don't, it doesn't matter how good that person is, because they won't like it at the company anyway. If we seem to do so, they've already received a fantastic pitch of the company, so they're really excited. So we give them a task, and the task is intended to resemble how it is to work together at the company as much as possible in a really short time frame. So for engineers, we give them a really small product task. They do it at home. The description of the task is intentionally very vague. It lacks a lot of details. Because in reality, there is no one who's going to come and give you a blueprint that is perfect. And we want to benchmark how this person during this process is capable of looking through the details, consider how will people actually use this product, what are the things that are missing, and take initiative to change it themselves. We've seen that, we believe that past behavior tends to repeat itself. So if we see that type of behavior in the task, we're pretty sure that person's going to keep doing the same things while they're at the company. We've also learned that academic performance is a really poor proxy of professional performance, especially for engineers. We've seen no correlation there at all. The other part is we don't set a deadline on the task. Part of it is because we don't know your schedule. You might have a lot at work already. So we leave it up to you to give us a deadline. But the critical part is, if you promise to send in the task on a Tuesday, and we receive it on a Wednesday, so past behavior tends to repeat itself, and that's an extreme warning sign. Unless there is a really, really, really good reason for that, we probably say no just because of that. So they come in, they send in the task, we review it, and then they come in, and this is pretty much designed just the way we work with product at Tictail. So any engineer in the entire company can make a product change anywhere in the product. That product change always comes in through a pull request, meaning that the code change is first visible to all the other engineers in the company. Anyone can review the code, but at least one person has to say, looks good to me. Usually get some feedback, like there's other ways of doing this is not optimal. Oh, have you tested whether this will actually impact this metric? So the tasks that they send in, we try to make the same kind of process around it. So they come in, we sit down, and we do a really thorough review of it. Much more thorough than a regular pull request at the company. And we might ask them questions that are maybe too easy, but we want to make sure they properly understood everything. And 2 things come out of this. Immediately, we see if this person can tolerate feedback. How do they present something they built? Can they share it? And usually when someone is really talented in a space, they have no problem talking about it, explaining it to somebody else, even if that somebody else pretends to be really stupid and ask really stupid questions. And that has worked really, really well. Once they've gone through that process or the task, we make sure that they meet 3 pairs of other people from other places in the company. Somebody from support, somebody from marketing, a designer, maybe 2 other engineers. And in the end, we do the Sunday test. There are many variants of this, but the Sunday test essentially is, if this person is alone at the office on a Sunday, does this make you more likely to want to go in and work with them? And if the answer is no, there probably is a no to the entire thing. Last but not least, whenever you do recruiting, treat people with respect, even the ones you don't want to recruit. Be super nice, because you spend hour after hour giving them a unique glimpse into your company. I rarely get this chance with our customers. There are very few customers that I've met for our company and give them this introduction to Tictail. And yet I met 100 engineers at least who has done this. So these people know a lot about your company. You want to make sure that they go out smiling and that they become ambassadors for your culture, your vision, the things you're doing, even if they're not a fit. We learned that the most important channel for us when we recruit is network, our own network. It turns out that people you meet also have networks. So we have 3 people in the company that have been recommended from someone we didn't hire. Think about that. It's kind of crazy. You didn't get a job, so you went to your friend and said, look, this company over there is really, really cool. I didn't get a job, but you might. 3 people. So out of 62, that's a pretty good ratio. The other part is once you actually start recruiting these people is the onboarding process. And this is a very common mistake, especially among slightly more junior managers. You assume that just because someone is really talented in their skill, that immediately when they come into your company is going to understand every nuance of how you do things, going to understand your culture, your values, how you make decisions. We spend a lot of time on onboarding, and we believe it's absolutely worth it. So the most important thing is what we call the buddy system. Everyone who comes in at Tictail is immediately assigned a buddy. They usually know about this person before they even join. If they have questions, they can email them, ask them, whatever they want. And the buddy does 2 parts. One is making sure that they come into their skill set. So we always try to match a buddy within the same discipline. So if you're a backend engineer, you get a backend buddy, preferably in the same team. The tricky part is when you create new roles. Sorry. The other part of the buddy is that they transfer culture, values. How do we make decisions at this company? And this relationship lasts for 6 months. And after 6 months of being onboarded by someone in detail, the new employee can suddenly become other people's buddies. So we can essentially double the size of the tech organization with a remain culture and remain our values every 6 months. And that's pretty fast. The other part is that everything we believe that we will ever repeat, we document it. We have a wiki that anybody in the organization are free to change. I think we have about 300 pages of lots of stuff there. A big part of that is related entirely to onboarding. It doesn't matter how many times you repeat something, people will forget, especially when you come into a new company, there are thousands of new things you need to learn. You will forget some of them. It's kind of nice to be able to go back to the wiki and review it. Also, the last person in is immediately responsible for updating anything that is outdated with the onboarding process. So immediately we give someone responsibilities. Speaking of responsibilities, especially with engineers, we want them to deploy code on the first day. And this comes with several requirements. Immediately, this requires that you keep your technical complexity around deploys down. For someone to come in during the first day and be able to make a product change, you need to have a really well-functioning deploy process. The other part is that you don't want to be fearing every time somebody joins the company and they deploy, meaning that you will need to have technology that will reduce the impact of mistakes. And by doing so, you're helping not just the person that is new in the company, but essentially every other engineer in the company. Because if they don't fear about deploying, they're going to be updating the product much more often. And last but not least, it's extremely empowering to join, like on the first day you join a company, be able to say that you made a product improvement. And once you start at that stage, you can go really, really far. So we recruited people, we started onboarding people, the organization has started scaling, we still don't really have any processes. This is just a reflection. Your processes in your organization will reflect your culture. The way you structure how people work is a direct resemblance of the values you have in your organization. And we had spent long and hard trying to find entrepreneurial people. We were always talking about responsibilities, freedom. We wanted to find people who could take initiative and be creative. And this is in late 2013. Our team started to grow. Everybody's working on one project. And we started to feel the pains of not having a process. So imagine that everybody wants to make their mark in this project. Everybody's really creative. Everybody has a lot of good ideas. So everybody's space of influence in that project starts growing. And everybody just wants to expand what they do. So this project starts to become really, really big. And as a consequence, we start noticing that there's a lot of lack of communication across the organization. Somebody's working on this thing over there and just expanding their scope. Somebody over here is doing the same thing, but soon they're going to be colliding. So we started realizing that we desperately needed a process. Most companies in this phase would probably just split the team in two, install 2 project managers, and hope for the best. But that would not have worked considering the type of people we had spent so much time finding and recruiting. Another common thing is that when you talk about processes, a lot of people think that a process is there to eliminate mistakes. This is true if you work in medicine, where a small mistake may mean that somebody loses their life. But when you work with a software as a service, where you can make a product change within seconds, you rather want to have a process that increases innovation, that encourages creativity. So once again, we spent long and hard finding these people. We should find and define a process of working that encourages them to use their strengths, the thing that we hired them for. And at the same time, we're talking about what are the things that we really, really appreciated at Tictail up until that point. And it was being a really small company made things really, really easy. So what if we could find a process that allowed us to essentially have startups within the startup? That people would be responsible for key areas, they would be able to work freely within them, and then they would interface with the other teams in the company. Eventually, we landed on something that is called OKR. We did not invent OKR. It's not something new. OKR was used by Intel in the 60s. Andy Grove, the then CEO, pushed it throughout the organization. Google started using OKRs when there were 15, 14 people. The way OKRs work is that it has 2 components, an objective and key results. An objective is like a vision. It tells you where you're going. It could be, we're going to build the best mobile marketplace experience. It's very vague. You don't know if you reached it or not. You don't know what's good and what's bad. The key results, on the other hand, are very, very specific. They're measurable and trackable, and they will tell you when you've achieved your objective. And we do this on different times. We do this on different levels. We have OKRs for the company. Tictail Inc. has OKRs. And then all the teams in the organization have OKRs as well. So the company OKR is on an annual time frame. The teams between 1 to 3 months, depending on the size of the project. And every team is responsible for Tictail from one perspective. And the whole point is that they set their own OKRs. Obviously, there's a conversation going on there between maybe me or the head of the chief product officer. But as long as all the teams achieve their key results and objectives, so will the company. So essentially, just a goal that sprinkles down. And if you try to investigate OKRs, to be true, the first 3 months was terrible, absolutely failure. We didn't know how to set key results. We were way too ambitious. So everybody got really, really sad because nobody met their goals. And then we realized 3 months, which is the original time length for an OKR period, was way too long for a really small company. We couldn't plan 3 months ahead. We could barely plan 1 month ahead. So we tweaked it, we changed it, and primarily one of the learnings we did was that this is probably the most important thing. When you work with OKRs, have one objective per team, because if you try to focus on everything, you're essentially not focusing on anything. Another thing that happens when you start working with OKR is that, well, the key results require data. You need to know, like the things you need to measure and track, you need the data to support it, right? You can't just estimate, you can't just guess what they are. Which kind of took our company into an entirely new level in the way we work, because the requirement of data gave us a lot more insight about the things we're doing. In order to set key results, you essentially need to start tracking everything, because if you start pointing at one data point over here, which is going to be your key result, but the product change might ruin something over there, you want to be really cautious that you're not messing things up. And whenever you work with data, retain it, save the data. Don't throw your data away, because there will be a time in the future we're going to say, oh, this looks interesting. I wonder if this is a seasonal thing. Did this happen last year, 2 years, 3 years ago? And the moment you have that data, you're going to pat yourself on the back and say, I knew this. I did good. I saved this. The moment you don't, you're going to hate yourself. And another thing is, we made data, essentially every data about the organization, accessible to everyone. The only exception is salaries, stock options. Those are private. Everything else, public to everyone in the company. And a really cool example of how that really works is that, for instance, there was a case where some people in the support personnel started noticing that they received more inbound tickets from a non-English speaking country. And then they went into this data tool and looked at the growth in that market. Did the number of tickets grow, or did the growth of the tickets align with the growth of the number of users in that market? They didn't. The growth of the tickets were much higher than the growth of the stores. So we started looking at the translations. Turned out the translations were really, really poor. People didn't understand what the features that they had in front of them really did, because the translations were terrible. So we redid the translations and reduced the number of tickets. And that's the type of thing that is possible when everyone from support personnel, marketing, engineers, designers have access to data. We use data to support essentially every decision. The moment we start arguing about things, we fall back to data. Don't get blinded by data, though. You still need to have some sense in your product. I've barely talked about the growth of Tictail, but it wasn't until we actually started collecting data that we understood the most important growth mechanism in Tictail. So in the top right corner of every store on the platform, there are 2 buttons. One says follow. If you click the follow button, you will receive updates about the store. Traditional follow button. But then there is also a store button. We knew that people clicked on it. But until we actually had all the data, we didn't really appreciate how important this was, because a small percentage of all the traffic click on that button and they start a store. Okay, that's a small percentage, who cares? But when you start adding that up, so that person started a store, and then they get traffic, and some of their traffic starts a new store, and then they get traffic. When you add that up, that is essentially the exponential growth behind the company. For instance, our entire growth in France, that button. We had some really, really big bloggers starting a store on Tictail. Bloggers have fans. They want to do the same thing as the really cool bloggers do. So they start a store and they have fans. And eventually, their fans are non-bloggers. It's maybe somebody who does clothing. So I'm not entirely sure how many stores there are in France, several thousand. It all started there. But we didn't appreciate that until we actually saw the data. And we've also had data support some really drastic organizational changes. So when we started Tictail in 2011, in the absolute earliest designs of the things we wanted to build, we started talking about building it for mobile. But I don't know if you remember this, it's 4 years ago, but in 2011, mobile was not for serious business. If you ask people what mobile was for, it was social, it was gaming. Nobody did serious business on mobile devices. But things started to change. I mean, obviously we started seeing these trends. In January 2014, we saw a clear trend that mobile, in terms of traffic to the stores, would surpass by the end of that year. It would surpass desktop. We saw the same trends when it came to transactions, purchases, that would essentially follow the same curve. We also started to see that it was not just customers, people browsing, but the people running the stores tried to log in with their mobile phones and try to manage their orders, start to do really serious business from a mobile device. The numbers were really, really small, but if you extrapolated them, you can say, okay, there's a really interesting trend going on here. And the conclusions were pretty obvious. There's essentially one thing we have to do. From now on, everything that comes out of this company has to be built for a mobile device. If it's not built for a mobile device, it's not coming out. I don't care how much time you spent on it, it has to support a mobile device. And there are essentially two ways to see this. So this trend was either a huge opportunity for us. We had enough data to see when it would happen. We could synchronize our launches essentially with the intersection point, or we could start seeing it as a threat, because essentially this would have been the biggest threat to our company. Somebody doing the exact same thing, but tailored for a mobile device. And this has happened so many times before. Kodak, the king of photography. Everybody knows what Kodak is. They missed the digital photography wave entirely. Totally replaced by companies like Flickr. Funny enough, Flickr missed the mobile digital photography space and was entirely replaced by Instagram. We did not want to be Kodak or Flickr. We went head on building Tictail for mobile devices. And today I'm really, really proud to say that we are also the easiest way to start a store from your mobile device. We made it even easier on the cell phone because we have so much more data about you. Suddenly we know where you are. We know your language settings. We might even know your locale settings. We might guess the currency your store is supposed to have. There's a part about the mobile aspect that kind of gives me goosebumps. Everybody in here has access to a computer, okay? But, so for you, this isn't really that drastic. You could have started your store on a desktop computer, or you were lazy, you were lying on the sofa, and you want to use your phone. That's essentially the big difference for you. But for a lot of people in this world, not only is mobile their primary computing device, it's their only. And in particular, the wave of Android throughout the world is really, really interesting. Somebody can go out and buy an Android device for $70 now, and through that device, they can start an online store. They can start selling things on a global scale. And given the growth mechanism that we talked about earlier, where one person in an area starts inspiring people around them, who inspires people around them, and all this chain effect. What I really, really look forward to is the next presentation I do, when I can show you some numbers on how someone in a developing market started a Tictail store from their phone, and how other people came in through that store and did the same thing, and the impact, the volume of transactions those people suddenly could do, and potentially change their career options from the already established ones in that market. Another really, really interesting thing we could do because of mobile was we could start experimenting with new business models. So all the people that had signed up for Tictail at that point had signed up to create a store. But coming in from an entirely different angle, we could start connecting all these stores to the Tictail marketplace. And today, the Tictail marketplace is the fastest growing part of our platform. And suddenly, the stores are starting seeing sales coming in from channels they didn't even know existed. Without doing any type of marketing, without paying anybody, they're automatically connected and can be discovered through that. So a marketplace essentially relies on community, right? If you have a community or if you have a marketplace, you will have some sort of a community. The benefit we had was that the stores that were created on Tictail, they were created through that button. They came into a store and saw a beautiful store and said, I want to be a part of this. I want to do the same thing. So the mindset of a community has always been there. But we spent a lot of time and money working with the community. They've learned us. They've taught us a lot of things. They've given us so much feedback about the product, but we've also made sure that there were scenarios where they could meet up and get to know each other and support each other. Not very unlike the type of community you have in a startup scene nowadays. We wanted to create that for the store owners. And I think the most beautiful example of that is, so in December last year for Christmas, we had a temporary pop-up shop. We asked some stores to send products and so on. The beautiful part came after we closed that store. 3 months later, some Swedish stores started asking us if we could send them tote bags like these. And usually we obviously do, but when several stores started asking, we're curious, like, what do you need these bags for? How come you're asking? It turned out that 8 stores went together and decided that they are going to open up a Tictail pop-up shop in Sweden by themselves. When we heard that, we got so excited, of course. We decided to help them, support them in any way we could. We helped them with design. We helped them find a store. Everything else, entirely driven by the community. And that really made us realize how important the global community is. And since I'm in Paris, I thought I would mention that next week we're actually doing a global meetup. So we're having a meetup at the same date in, I think, 15, 16 cities. And one is here in Paris. So if you don't trust me about the Tictail community, or you want to understand who these entrepreneurs are, make sure to drop by. There's some more details on tictail.com/events. I would be really happy if you came by. Also, some other really great colleagues of mine will be there. If you have specific questions about building a community, our community managers will be there. So make sure to drop by. And with that, I would like to say thank you for listening. And also, here are my contact details. As part of building a community among entrepreneurs, make sure if you have any questions or any feedback, I'll be happy to receive it. And I'll make sure to answer as soon as I can. And I think we're transitioning into a QA now. So thank you all. Crystal clear. Do you have any questions or complaints?
Hi, thanks for the talk. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your technology choices, maybe on the back end, all that lies behind. Thanks.
Absolutely. So before Tictail, I was at a company called Blocket. No one in here knows what Blocket is, but I am 100% certain that you've all used software I've written already. Okay, who doesn't know what Leboncoin is? Who has not used Leboncoin? Okay, good. So you use my software. So Blocket and Leboncoin are based on the same technical stack. They're owned by the same parent company. I was the tech lead at that parent company. That tech stack was written in C. So for those of you who are technical or less technical, C is a pretty low-level language. You generally don't use it for web development. And it's a certain type of people who do C and usually another type of people who do web. So at Blocket, when I was recruiting for my team, I needed to find some low-level programmers who knew everything from the bottom of the stack to the absolute top. Like they would know CSS, JavaScript, PHP, and then down to C. Recruiting was really, really hard. So when we started Tictail, my #1 priority was to use a language that was readable and would allow us to expand the tech team without any hassle. So we started out building Tictail in Python. the original version of Tictail was a monolithic application, meaning that everything that you did on Tictail bounced through the same service. We're still on Python today, but we have migrated to service-oriented architecture, which means that when you touch a site on Tictail, all the different components, essentially, the data for them comes from different services in our infrastructure. And the core reason is that we have a lot of stores on the platform, and we treat reliability with the highest respect. So if Tictail would be down, suddenly we have 100,000 stores that are down. So we want to make sure that if any part of Tictail has any type of disturbance, that only that little piece is affected, rather than having the entirety of the platform disturbed. And the other part is that we want to make sure that people come in, when they start working with a piece of the platform, that the scope of the things they need to understand to make a change is quite limited. So between all the services, we have APIs. Those are pretty static, but behind them, you can change everything. But the short answer is a lot of Python. We're hosted on Amazon Cloud Services. We also use a lot of JavaScript. Essentially, everything you see on Tictail today is a JavaScript client speaking with our backend APIs. Yes.
First, thank you for your presentation. My question is concerning your recruiting process. Is it something you build in intern, or did you have help of a specialist, HR specialist?
So the recruiting process at Tictail, the initial phase, we built it internally, but it's the result of numerous iterations. And obviously, a lot of the things that have helped us build it the way we did comes from like reading great blog posts. There's a lot of great content out there. So we took the pieces we liked from those blog posts and we applied them to our process. And actually, just recently, we hired our first recruiter. We have, up until 3 months ago, never worked with a single recruiter. That's why I said that network is really, really important. The reason we hired a recruiter is I want someone to own the recruiting funnel, not necessarily so much headhunting. It's a funny story about him. So he was head of tech recruiting at Spotify in Sweden. And I talked about this with him. I explained how we made recruiting everyone's #1 priority. I think I repeated it 20 times because that was part of my sales pitch. Like, this is really important. You're going to be the only recruiter, but you're not going to be alone. And whenever somebody starts 2-3 weeks after they're at the company, I always ask them, what was the biggest surprise? Because that's a key data point. That's something we should make sure to tell people so that they're not surprised. You don't want people to be surprised, or at least not in a bad way. And his answer was, I was surprised that everybody was helping out with recruiting. And I told him, like, I told you like 20 times. He's like, yeah, but I didn't believe you until I actually saw it. So, of course, he appreciated it. That made his world a lot easier. But yes, the short answer is most of it in-house, but obviously we learned from other people's mistakes.
Thank you for the presentation. My question is about data, and you said like you're tracking every piece of data that you can track. So are you dividing trackers as, are you using tools or are you coding everything in-house?
Really good question. So the face of how we use data at the company has changed drastically over the last 2-3 years. We start out with really, really basic tools. We start up initially Google Analytics. Everybody, if you don't have it, use it. And then we start using things like Mixpanel. Also really, really easy to set up. Quite expensive. And then we started to have a need of combining the Mixpanel data with our own data, with some Google data. So we started adding another tool to it. We started using RJ metrics that would allow, and primarily it was important because we want to make sure that everyone in the organization could work with the data. But it was scattered all over the place. It was kind of tricky to work with. And especially the data that we had in our own product. for me to expect that our head of marketing should log in through the VPN, SSH into a machine, run any SQL command line query to run her SQL queries to get some data is ridiculous. So we added RJ metrics on top of that. And then we started growing out of RJ metrics because we needed to have finer control. And today we use still Mixpanel for a lot of the tracking. We have some parts that are our internal tool, especially because we do a lot of A/B testing. I didn't really mention this, but whenever we make a product change, we deploy it to a subset of the users, partially because we want to make sure that the risk impact is really, really small, but also because we want to measure the data, see if that changes behavior somehow. And those things are built in-house. And eventually, all of that goes into our data warehouse system, which today is on top of, we use a tool called SizeSense. But it's humble beginnings. We started very, very small and started growing that as the need for it increased. And the same goes with the tech. Like Tictail didn't start out to be this super fancy technology stack. It started out being exactly what we needed. And the same goes for data. And as our needs started growing, so did the complexity and the tools that we used.
Hey, yeah. Could you tell us more about the marketplace feature? I mean, how it functions, how do you connect stores with each other, and so on and so forth?
Absolutely. So when you start a store on Tictail, so all the stores are hosted on our platform. All the data about every single store is on our databases. And we started opening up the marketplace, meaning that whenever you start a store, your products and your store would automatically be connected there. The key part with the marketplace was, because our promise has always been that your brand will be at the center of it. We will never position your products out of scope just randomly. We're not Le Bon Coin. We're not really cheap products that are just stacked in ugly design. Sorry, anyone. We want people to understand that there's a beautiful story behind every product. So that has been our promise with the marketplace. And so essentially when you start a store, you're available in the marketplace, and we can choose to feature some of the stores or some of the products, but you can also follow the stores you like. And based on the type of stores that you follow, your experience in the marketplace will start to be tailored for your experience or for your taste. And we're at the early stages of the marketplace, but it looks very, very promising. So the marketplace is available either on web. We also have an Android and iPhone app. So if you search Tictail on the Play Store or App Store, you can experience the marketplace.
Just to be sure I got it right, it's basically me as a store owner. You're going to base the market, like how I'm positioned on the marketplace. You're going to base everything on what, like I'm a store owner, and you're going to base my positioning in the marketplace on what I liked, on the other stores I liked, or on the other stores my customers liked.
Your positioning in the marketplace, so the question was, where will we position a store in the marketplace? And initially, your position in the marketplace is either that we have featured you in a category that your store is in, so it might be men's fashion or women's fashion, but when your customers start to like stores that are similar to yours, you will automatically be featured in their feeds. So some part is very controlled by us. Another part is entirely depending on the customer's behavior around your store.
Hi. My question is more on recruiting, and more particularly, I work in a social business, so there is some constraint, but my question is, how do you attract the best talents or talents starting from nowhere? What is the promise, in fact?
The million-dollar question. Okay, so how do you attract people when the first people in the company? So one thing we certainly didn't use to attract people was salary. We had very limited funding. In fact, I think the 10 first people who joined Tictail went down in salary quite drastically. So the thing that we used primarily to attract really talented people was an appealing culture. We promised them certain set of things, certain values that we had at the company. Part of it was the freedom and responsibility. Being early in a company is also pretty interesting because it allows you to just grow with the organization. A lot of the people that were really early on in the organization now have several leading positions in the company. We provided equity. We give stock options to employees. That's something I strongly recommend for multiple reasons. Don't be greedy. You want people to feel ownership. Because when people feel ownership, they're going to take responsibility. They're going to care. And the last was an appealing vision that, well, it was appealing for the type of people who joined. And those were the type of people we wanted in the company. So I guess those are the most important ones. But also spending a lot of time. And essentially everyone who came in up until 20 people, came from our immediate or the second step in our network. So having some past experiences will help. I had a brief conversation earlier with someone who talked about, well, he came from a business school. How do you find talented engineers? And I guess it's places like this.
Hi, thank you for your talk, very interesting. I have another $1 million question, which is even when you're asking people to divide their salaries by 4 and get a fantastic place to work and a fantastic startup to work with and so on, you need funding. So my question is a bit around what you've just described, which is when you have a company which is growing that fast, so you need to recruit people. How did it work versus the financing of it? How much has been self-funding because you're successful? What about the, how did you manage that?
Absolutely. So when we started Tictail, for 6 months, we set aside half of our salaries. And after 6 months, we quit our jobs, and that was the original funding for the company. We went down to 1/5 of our previous salaries, meaning that we could essentially barely live on that salary. And that would give us a 6-month runway, more or less. We built an initial prototype because just like this, I'm telling you, I told all of you several times, Tictail is the easiest way to start an online store. It doesn't matter how many times I tell you until you actually test the product and say, oh, this is actually really easy. And the same went for investors. So you could go out and talk about how easy we would build, we're going to make the easiest way to start an online store, but that's pipe dreams until you show them something. So we spent that time building a prototype, a working prototype where we demonstrated how we wanted to make it extremely easy. And then we started meeting investors. We met with the investors that we were the least interested in to begin with. That was training ground. Received all the questions. And after meeting about 30 investors, we had answers to all questions that an investor may have. And then we went and started meeting the ones we wanted to have. And in the end, we met Balderton Capital in London. We did a pitch, showed a prototype. They loved it. We loved them. And that was the initial seed funding. And the next part was, well, essentially after the launch. So we didn't need a prototype, we had a product. In that step, it was primarily the growth rate of the organization that we used in order to raise more funding. And then, well, one of the key criteria we had was to raise money initially from an international investor. We're based in Sweden, but we wanted to build a global product. That's why we raised partially from Balderton. And then we wanted to go to the US, so we raised from Thrive Capital in the US. And a recent funding raise, or recent funding round that we just closed, that we announced recently, was primarily in order to emphasize the marketplace growth. 3.
I just wanted to know what was the background of the co-founders, and if you were just engineers when you start to hire the first marketing and communication person.
Good question. I forgot to mention that. So the founding team, we're 4 people, 2 from a designer background and 2 from an engineering background. We're heavily biased towards product. There are different types of people who start companies. You might see it from a business perspective, and that the product is the buy result. We saw it the other way around. We build a great product, and the business will come by itself. And in short, so we initial hires, the first, I think our head of marketing came in as employee number 14 or 13. So I'm not sure if that's early or late. But actually we tried to hire our first marketing person before the launch. In that case, that would have been employee number 7. But we had a really hard time finding someone who we believe could actually manage such an early stage company. So the person who joined us was probably the one who dropped the most in salary. She was head of social media marketing at ASOS and moved from London to join Stockholm. But has been highly successful in the company ever since. So I think she's pretty satisfied now.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your presentation. I'd like to know from the first 2 rounds of money raising, seed money and the first round, what's the proportion of capital you have to let go? And from the seed money perspective, how long have you lived on that money? Thank you.
So the rule of thumb tends to be somewhere between 15 and 20% across the general fundraisers. So you tend to give away about that size. We are in that area as well. The seed money, we raised $1.6 million. And let's see if I get this right now. That gave us a runway of 14 to 15 months. But we kept salaries really low in the early days of Tictail. And that was a key part. And we have, which I haven't mentioned, we have never done any paid user acquisition. All of our growth has been organic. So that helps a lot also in terms of runway.
So only 20% of the 3 rounds go into...
No. So the rule of thumb generally during a fundraise is, well, essentially anything maybe between 10 and 20% per round. We are in that ballpark.
What is the main use of having a venture capitalist on the market that you wanna go into?
So there are numerous ones. Obviously, you get access to a network of people. So when we wanted to launch in the US, when we first approached, when we started talking with Thrive in New York, we started talking about setting up an office there even. But before we did that, they connected us to a lot of people that we could utilize in order to do marketing originally, like people on the ground. So besides capital, access to people, network, and expertise, like market expertise. So a lot of the senior hires that we've done in our company, most of it, like many of the introductions, have come from the VCs.
Hi. Really, everyone has said that they were. The presentation was really spot on, wonderful, and the timing excellent. Question: what is your business model today?
So, on top of the stores, the core of the platform is free, but as a store, you can add add-ons to your store. So if you want to provide discount codes, that's a paid subscription. If you want to have marketing campaigns, we provide a tool to do Facebook campaigns. We have a commission on those campaigns. So what we did, not only did we build these plugins that you can use on your store, but we opened up the Tictail platform so third-party developers can integrate with Tictail. Our requirement is that all the transactions for the plugins go through our system, and on all third-party transactions we charge 30%. And also we have several parts within it, the product, like we receive kickbacks from payment providers, but apps and plugins is a primary one. Awesome. Okay, thank you all very much. This was really fun.